This is by far the strongest boss we have ever faced. A 1300% HP Elite Lych. That's 312 million HP for tier 5, meaning each skull has way more HP than the entire boss normally has. And let's quickly compare this to some of the previous strongest bosses ever to give you some context. We had a very strong Lich before and a very strong Bloonarius, but nothing like this. And back then we also had modifiers to make the boss slower and shorter ability cooldowns, etc. But this time we have none of that. All we get is a lot of extra starting cash. This level of HP is honestly insane, and on a boss like Lich 2, which makes it a lot harder than something like Bloonarius, because the soul gets 13x HP as well, and Lich steals your buff, so you can't buff your towers very much. It's such a big jump from the previous strongest boss that we have ever seen, so this really caught me off guard. Like, I actually almost choked on my food when I saw this. Like, I'm really surprised that they decided to go this hard. This week is timed, and I'm gonna be playing Ranked Elite, and it's actually my first time playing Timed Lich, so just my luck for it to be on a week like this. And this boss has a very high skill ceiling. There is a lot of really cool hard tricks that you can do to beat the boss faster, but this being my first time, I had a lot to learn, so my expectations of myself weren't too high. I start the game by discounting a bunch of banks and surviving with 2 dart monkeys, and then we're gonna roll that into a boat farm once the banks are about full, and after that we're gonna alternate between upgrading the boats to tier 4 and getting central markets, and once we have 10 of them to buff the income of the boats, we're gonna go for a banana central and overclock. Then we get some BRFs and more overclocks, and then also some more central markets towards the end, and then on round 38 we prep some Desperado abilities to increase the range of our boats to get extra sellback value on our towers on round 39 when we're gonna create our setup. So for tier 1 there is something pretty unfortunate that has to be mentioned. With Lich you can gain a lot of time by using the Ice Paragon to skip a skull, since every skull spawns a Lich soul and makes the boss invulnerable for a minimum of 6 seconds, so that's 6 seconds saved each tier that you can use the ability. And this week we had so much starting cash that we could afford it for tier 1. I think I had over 1.2 mil by round 39, which is pretty crazy, but getting the Ice Paragon too early caused your account to get banned. Ninja Kiwi's auto-flagging system thought that people were cheating for getting the Paragon to kill the first tier. Which is very unfortunate, and if this happened to you, just reach out to Ninja Kiwi support and they will get your account unbanned. This has happened once before, to my knowledge, in a race event, which was for the same reason, getting a tower that the auto-flagging system thinks you can't get. But with extreme events becoming more common lately, Ninja Kiwi has said that they learned a lot from this week to try and prevent this from happening again. So this means that we can't really get the Ice Paragon for tier 1 unless we want to get banned and then wait for Ninja Kiwi to unban me, so we're gonna kill the first boss tier the same way we normally would, but without skipping one skull using the Ice Paragon, which is by getting a temple and a whole bunch of 042 Spike Storms so I can target their normal attacks to where the boss is. So the spikes are buffed by the temple, villages, and the bonus pierce from the Lord of the Abyss, which has a lot of range due to the 9 other 002 mermonkeys, and none of those buffs can be stolen by Lich, so we're all good. Then we also have all of the debuffs, but I didn't manage to time my glue right, because it has to hit when the boss is not invulnerable, but I don't think I really needed it anyway, because this kill is very fast either way. We're talking about saving minuscule amounts of time in a run that's gonna end up being several minutes due to the extreme HP of the later tiers. So the tier 1 time was 48.66 seconds, and you may have noticed that I kept an overclock on my Banana Central during the kill, and that's because for the first 4 tiers, Lich can only steal buffs that are within like 100 distance units, which is roughly this big. And I realized later that my Banana Central placement wasn't very smart, because unlike tier 3 or tier 4, the boss is gonna advance a bit further on the track and steal the buffs from my farm, so later I will move the Central to a spot further away so I can ultra boost it and keep the stacks all the way to the final tier. So the farming eventually ends up looking like this. We got all tier 5 farms, bottom paths to buff the boats, overclocks to buff the BRFs, and then we got a bunch of druids for their ability, and also the tier 5 heli, and we also have the energizer in the bottom right corner. We actually got that energizer for tier 1 to reduce the cooldown of the spike storms, but I forgot to say that. The new Opolis I got had 19 farms, which isn't that many. I could have gotten like 4 more very easily, but I was kind of sloppy. And this obelisk I'm gonna keep for the entire game, so that's actually quite a bit of money lost that way. But I'm no stranger to losing money. I just lost all my profit in the stock market this week, so this ain't nothing new. On round 58, it's time to get the Ice Paragon, and I actually get it to degree 15, which might seem a bit strange. I didn't go for a 20 because I just needed a couple of degrees, like 10 or 12, to get the ability to come off cooldown in time. I'm not using the Paragon for damage. I was planning on keeping this Paragon until after tier 4 and then get a new one to a higher degree in a different spot, but as you will see later, that turned out to be a big mistake, one amongst many in this run. Then I get a degree 61 Spike Paragon, and this is another mistake, but one I made knowingly. Getting a Paragon for tier 2 isn't really what you want to do, because if you sell it, you will lose a lot of money. So then you gotta keep it, but if you're gonna keep it, you have to spend a lot of money on it to make it strong enough so it's worth it to have it on tier 5. A better choice here would be to just do the same thing we did for last tier, but with a True Sun God buff instead. But honestly, I was lazy, and knowing I wasn't gonna get top 1 this week, I decided to play it in a more relaxed way. So starting the fight, I use my Spike's controlled burst ability that increases the attack speed at the start, because the Paragon is just outside the range that Lich can steal buffs, and this buff can be stolen, but I do have time for 1 burst ability. And then the second skull is slower, so here is where I time my ice ability to skip the second skull. For the rest of the boss, there isn't really anything that I need to do. The rest of the skulls are pretty much instant. Not actually instant, but it feels that way because it's pretty close. A degree 61 Spike Paragon is quite overkill for tier 2, even when the boss has 1300% HP, because the Spike Paragon is just that good. So during the kill we can still overclock our farms, but only the ones that aren't close to the boss. And speaking of overclocks, I had to sell a few of them, because when a new round starts, overclocks gets a temporary hidden buff that increases the attack speed of the foam for 1 second, and that can be drained by Lich if you get very unlucky with the timings, which of course I did. And now I finally place my hero, which is Adora. For this event you could go 2 ways, either Geraldo for higher Paragon degrees using totems plus better farming, or Adora for a stronger VTSG and temples and sun avatars, and honestly I kinda wish I went with Geraldo because that would have been simpler and Adora caused nothing but trouble later on. And since there isn't really anything more I want to say about the farming, other than that it was very annoying, let me tell you about how Lich drains buffs and what interesting tricks you can do to avoid it. The first drain happens as soon as the spawn animation is finished, and then every 12 seconds from that point, and if the next time happens just when you've hit a skull and the boss is currently invulnerable, it will happen when the boss goes back to being normal again. So this means that you can actually use some buffs with specific timings without having them be drained, even on tier 5 when the drain happens globally. If the time to kill a skull lines up perfectly, you can use a buff right after a drain, then if the rest of the skull takes 11.99 seconds to kill, then the next drain won't happen until after the next 6 seconds of invulnerability, for a total of 17.99 seconds that you can have a buff active without it healing Lich. So the buff needs to last less than 18 seconds. In most scenarios quite a lot less, because most scenarios are not perfect, or you need a way to cancel the buff without selling a tower, because selling also causes Lich to heal. For example, you can place a permabrew and then sacrifice the permabrew to Adora right before the next drain cycle. So there's a lot of advanced stuff like that you can do to gain an edge. On round 78 we get the NG Paragon to degree 60, and then we get the VTSG on the water for the carrier buff, and I also sold my old support only temple and replaced it with a temple that also has primary and magic, because the old temple was gonna get sacked to the VTSG if I had kept it. Then we get a lot of sun avatars and all the debuffs, and also a flying fortress to start farming some pops, although I might as well have waited with that until tier 4 since it's not gonna get a lot of pops on this tier anyway, but nonetheless I've started to ultra boost it so it can get more pops later on. I begin by giving a take aim ability to Adora to give her more range, and then I perform the sacrifice, and this is so that she will be able to give the buff to the sun avatars the furthest away from her, and Lich can steal the take aim buff, but it won't be able to do it this time. And here I started to run into some other problems, something that would be fixable for now but get a bit worse later on. I want to use my NG Paragon overclock on the Spike Paragon, but that also overclocks nearby normal towers, and the overclock lasts longer on normal towers than Paragons, which would cause Lich to heal from it. But the fix for now was just as simple as not having any Sun Avatars right next to it, and then everything was fine. So this tier we don't have much to do during the kill either, just try to time some center explosions and that's about it. So the first 3 tiers are gonna be very fast, because you have enough cash to buy things to take out each skull very quickly, but on tier 4 is when the boss really starts to have a lot of HP, and I'm thinking I'm just gonna skip the farming this time once again, because it's the same thing as before, and we're gonna head straight to tier 4. So here I've got a degree 60 wizard, a degree 60 boat, a degree 20 sub, which is submerged, a degree 40 boomerang, more temples, tax zone, mad, and I also Chinooked Adora, because the boss will now get close enough to her that it would drain the take aim buff, so I had to move her a bit, and I also start the fight before doing the sacrifice, so I can use the long arm of light ability before that to increase her range. This is tier 4, so the drains are still not global, so I start the fight by using the overclock on my wizard while I use the morph ability, and I also use the controlled burst on my spike since they're both outside the drain range, and Lich won't have time to come close enough during the 15 seconds that those buffs are active. I did have a homeland defense here, because I was experimenting a bit on using buffs to see what I could do to gain an edge, but in the final attempt I didn't end up using that at all, except at the very end before I kill the boss, when I know it won't have time for one more drain, and then I can go ahead and use everything, like the NG overclock and the spike's controlled burst, just use everything at the end since it won't have time for one more drain. On this tier, the first time around, I ran into a problem where I had placed my mermonkey that is creating the water for my sub and boat too close to my spike and wizard, so when I used the Paragon overclock, the mermonkey would get buffed, and as I explained before, it lasts longer on normal towers, so Lich ended up draining the buff, so I had to remake this setup, which was kind of annoying. So now the time is up to 3 minutes and 36 seconds, so I definitely lost a bit of time this tier, could have done a lot better, but now it's time we prepare for the final tier. Here I'm gonna get a degree 60 ace, a degree 25 tack, a degree 21 bomb, and a degree 40 ninja, and everything is inside the sub's range for reduced cooldowns. The degrees here are kind of ass, because number 1 I didn't have Geraldo, and number 2 I didn't end up having quite as much money as I would have hoped for, and I still needed to spend some more on temples and some avatars, etc. And as usual, half of the entire game was done in the last 12 hours of the event, just like how I used to treat my exams in school. Old habits die hard. And then I realized another huge mistake. Here I was going to sell my old Ice Paragon to get a new one to at least degree 20 closer to the center of the map, but there is a bug right now that causes the VTSG to get sold if the Ice Paragon is sold, even though it should be able to stay on the water without it. And this means that for a period of time during this kill, the Ice Paragon won't be able to attack. Not the boss, nor the bloons. It is literally in the worst possible spot I could have placed it. So for a period of time I won't have the plus 10 damage debuff from the Ice Paragon, which makes a huge difference since I went with Adora for this very reason, so I could have a really strong Sun Avatar and Temple setup. And I also noticed that while my wizard's morph ability is ready at the start of tier 5, I don't have any mana whatsoever to be able to use it, because I used it at the end of tier 4 and the wizard doesn't have enough range to drain mana from the bloons during the regular round, so a lot of things went wrong in this run, and honestly it was very frustrating. I went into the event with very limited expectations of myself, since I knew the skill ceiling for this boss is very high and it was my first time doing it, but at the same time, if I don't finish top 3, I kind of feel like I lost, which is a pretty dumb mindset to have when you've just recently gotten into competitive bossing, or a very good mindset depending on how you see it. Either way, timed events like this, where nothing is banned, other than the players who got the Ice Paragon, am I right? These events are kind of annoying, because I feel like they can be optimized to infinity. There is no point at which you feel like you've succeeded or you feel satisfied. Like, do you remember Felicia's final run in the boss tournament? They spent like 280 hours optimizing the run and then continued optimizing it further after the tournament had finished. Like, there truly is almost no limit. You could go on almost forever, and I think that's one of the reasons I prefer least tears or least cash, as the levels of satisfaction comes at clearly defined levels. Either a strat works or it doesn't, and when it comes to timed events, I still got a long way to go before I can compete in the more complex ones. Simpler ones like last week's Bloonarius is fine, that's more suitable for my current level of skill in timed, I think. So for this final tier I lost a lot of time. I was Chinooking my Esprit around, retargeting my Spike, etc. and I couldn't bother to try and find any fancy techniques using buffs or anything here, so the event was over in like 1 or 2 hours and I was pretty exhausted after this boss. I also got the tier 5 bottom path bomb, just in case I would be slow to kill the souls sometimes. The bomb paragon does help with that as well, but if it happens regularly they can take turns with the passive blitz ability. The final time ended up being 7 minutes and 22 seconds, which was good for 6th place, but given how far ahead the player in first was, you might as well just call it top 50 instead of 6th. Anyway, leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one.